Any thoughts about the video?
Yeah, I think this is great. It's especially for the younger generation, this is hopefully geared towards. I think it's quite important for them. There's a tension between sitting in the classroom, right, and acting in the arena of democracy, and this usually outside the classroom. We can't be talking about a climate emergency all the time, right? And politically, this happens every day, but there's still people, especially young people, think that we're not doing enough and not doing it fast enough. So I think this is a great tension, and I think we should pick it up in the Q&A.
No sé si he entendido la pregunta. ¿Me puede hacer, Javier, de traductor?
Christian can do that because Christian speaks Spanish perfectly. Christian, can you make
no sé si
the
es una
question
pregunta o es una duda.
No era una pregunta, era un comentario. Me encantó el video.
Vale. La entendí bien. He puesto el link en el chat. I have put the link in chat because I think there is a problem with Teams. Teams, there is no capacity for the video to transmit the video.
Cole, I don't know if you have any comments. No, if I had one,
Es excelente, muchas gracias por compartir, y sobre todo para los chicos, ¿verdad? Para las generaciones jóvenes y nuestros estudiantes de undergraduate studies. Es muy bueno.
Gracias.
I know that Anna said at the beginning that it was conceptual, but I don't know if when I watch the video, I have a question for you. Is that the people who dancing and who is the body dancing and the people who is on the streets asking for act no, etc. They are the same young people. And in your opinion, Anna, you want to show that these same young people, they have the same idea and the same thoughts about to change the actual world, or you try to show there are two kind of different young people?
Yo no lo tengo claro. It's not no es una idea cerrada. Si quiere lo puede traducir un poco, es mucho más fácil para mí. Para mí, que suelo concebir el cuerpo de una manera muy, o sea, el cuerpo es muy físico, pero también creo que el cuerpo en movimiento también puede ser político, ¿no? Entonces, quizás lo que intento es unir esas actividades de ocio y de estar en espacios públicos, bailando o pintando o en común con esas otras más políticas de una manera más explícita, ¿no? Es decir, que todas pueden ser parte de un activismo juvenil en la situación en la que nos encontramos, ¿no? De alguna manera es eso, ¿no? No las veo como algo contradictorio, quiero decir. Pero sí, uno puede verse también ante la diatriba o la pregunta, ¿no? De cómo activarse y cómo participar en lo público, de qué manera participar en lo público, pero no las veo como contradictorias, no las quiero mostrar como contradictorias.
Christian Relay, do you think they are the same young people looking for the same solutions in the same way that Anna explained to all of us that maybe in this pandemic moment to go to any exhibition on the streets is part of our asking for freedom, no? Finally, no? And then do you think it's the same, the people who is trying to enjoy the life as the young people want, and the people who dedicate their time to protest on the streets, we are talking about the same people, the same young people, or the young people is in crisis? Because one of the topics of the World Forum of Democracy always, because it's a forum for the young people and the young people who is involved in the fight to get democracy everywhere, is that what means to be part of the democracy, no? We need people protesting, or we need people as part of the political parties, or we need people in the NGOs, or we need people dancing on the streets free as part of the new freedom, no? What do you think?
No, I think there is no contradiction. We are not, how can I say, we are not one color, we are not one personality. We have faces, and it depends on what takes. The fact that perhaps, let's just to use a simple example, a young woman might be very interested. She might be very interested in fashion and go to fashion shows, and her world might revolve around that theme. But that doesn't exclude that she's not pro-environment as well, that she's not opening to other issues, which some people might say, especially us being academics, don't waste your time on fashion, just concentrate on more serious items for this world. Democracy, climate change, the animals that are losing their habitats. That is all part of one. I mean, we're not just one human being. We are all not complex. If I may use a metaphor, we are a very complex machine, and one doesn't exclude the other. Perhaps in the future, Anna, it will be wonderful to continue with the sequence and involve the older generation, the senior citizens. Why do we assume that all the senior citizens 60 and over will be pro-climate change? Is that an assumption that we have? And the youth that are just partying and drinking and smoking marijuana, they are not going to be an activist. No. One doesn't exclude the other.
Yeah, if I may, I like the connection that Javier made between political activism, or what was shown in the video as movement, and you say it's political, and I agree, it can be political, and even so, if it's not activism in the traditional sense, it can still be political. And here I would concur with Dorelei by saying that, everything we do, and this is not just for the younger generations, so even ocio, right? So even what we do in our spare time, all of these activities, they have an impact, so we should be self-conscious, right, about these implications. So I saw this more as a call to arms, but not just to the younger generations, I think to everybody, that what Javier said, make use of the opportunity that liberalism gives you, right, to voice your concerns, and on the other side, but also to do something about this instead of remaining passive, right? So if we think about democracy, and this is what interests me, is how can we create legitimacy for an ambitious global climate change or sustainability policy? Right? And of course, within democracies, this can be done, by making use of liberalism and these opportunities. But at the same time, of course, not all countries in the world are democracies, right? So how do we organize legitimacy on a national level and on an international level, right? Under conditions of fragmentation between and within states.
You are right, Christian, and following, if you want, we can start to talk about everything that you said before, the four of us. But Christian asking about legitimacy, and you talk about the German foreign policy, talking about the climate change. And in our minds, Jan, and not only Jan, and all people have Germany like a model. The Green Party, the Green Movement start in Germany. We always believe that thanks to the Green Movement in Germany, now we have Green Parties in other parts of Europe, probably against the nuclear systems and against all of this all kind of contamination. But looking about this legitimacy, do you think that nowadays the Green Movement in Europe, and especially in Germany, and more now that we are talking about democracy, has real the strong power that has in the past, or maybe no? They have more than in the past. What do you think? And what do all of you think about?
Yeah, if I may. Well, first things first. It's true. The German environmental movement of the 1980s, and of course it was connected with a series of other, say, socially more revolutionary trends, like feminism and decolonialism and these things. It grew out of, it is a very, say, a civil society movement, right, with deep roots in German society. So I think this is the specificity, that the environmental movement has always been relatively broad, and I think it has only grown in strength. But not the environmental movement per se, but the idea of environmentalism. Right? And this is now shared across the political spectrum. Something that in the 1980s was not so clear, of course, even though you have to admit that it is the Conservative Party, so under Helmut Kohl, who creates the first federal ministry for the environment. Right? So we can see here that the larger parties, the Big Tent parties, were quite sensitive towards environmentalism and then picked it up, right, to make it part of the political mainstream, and thus taking it out of, say, the more radical left-wing groups, right? And this was, I think, quite important to take it to the political center, and then all the political parties could, become part of the environmental movement, so to speak. But of course, much less radical, much less toned down, right? So, and this is also correct, right? But if you look at the conservative government of Angela Merkel, and she used to be an environment minister, and if you compare it to, say, the policies of the Kohl administration in the 1990s, we see there's a big change, right? I mean, it's much more ambitious on the environmental side domestically, but also internationally. And I think it is the conservative government that has helped convince economic actors that environmentalism is in their best interest as well. What about the Greens as a political party? And we see that they've become only more successful and more powerful, really. And some authors call them the New People's Party, right, or the New Large Tent Party. But this will only happen if it sheds some of its more fundamentalist, more radical or eco-radical ideas. Then it will move more into the political center, and it has already surpassed the Social Democrats, so the Labour administrations, Labour parties, and could become, say, the second big party on the side, apart from the Conservatives, right? And this is why probably the next government will be a black-green coalition, right? So a coalition between the Conservatives of Angela Merkel. Well, Angela Merkel will not be in power anymore, but the Conservatives and the Greens. And this will be a tremendous change.
I have a question for Christian.
Okay, ready? Come on.
Christian, just out of curiosity, because here in Canada, the Green Party has been going on for decades. And now, of course, they have gathered a lot of momentum. But the majority of the followers of the Green Party are the young generations, and now the ones that were young in the decade of the 90s. So it's that group that they're targeting to. People older than 50 years, it's very seldom that you will see them as candidates of the Green Parties or able to vote for the Green Parties. So how could we as in the general, make these type of parties like the Green Parties or the Animal Parties more like a mainstream party? So they will be opening up their platform to everybody, not only the so-called radical youth, that they skip school and they don't go to high school or they don't go to university, but they stand on the plaza smoking marijuana and blah 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 blah.
Well, I hope this is a cliche. What I'm trying to say is that what's specific about the German political system, and I think this has helped the Greens, is its ability to socialize, say, radical parties, be it on the left, on the hard left, as the Greens in the 1980s, or on the hard right, so to socialize them into the political center. So slowly but steadily, then these parties become less radical, more mainstream. And this has happened to the Greens as well. So there's always been a split within the Green Party between more moderate factions that are open to political action, say that becoming part of a coalition government, right? And then more radical factions that say, no, if we become part of a coalition, we will lose our authenticity, right? And so this has always been, say, one of the fundamental, say, tensions within the Green Party. And if you look at who votes for the Greens in Germany, I think it's not just the young people, even though the Greens are very popular in the younger generations. And the Conservatives as well. This is quite interesting. But as we don't have this collision between Conservatives, say pro-industry, anti-environment, and the Greens, anti-industry, pro-environment. So this doesn't happen in Germany, right? And this is because this is the magic of coalition governments. Right, and of course, then we have a federal system, and we already have a black-green coalition in Baden-Württemberg, in the southwestern state, that is one of the economic heartlands of Germany. Right, and if you look at the Greens there, they sound very much like the soft left wing of the Conservatives. So they're not so different, and they're voted by those people who used to vote for the Conservatives. So there's a huge voter shift, right, from the Conservatives that have been in power for 40 years in Baden-Württemberg towards the Greens. So I think this is phenomenal, right? But it's a very different Green Party from, say, the younger generation and the youth movement within the Greens that are more radical and they want more urgency, more change quicker. Right? So the question really is about speed. So how can we decarbonize quickly and thoroughly enough instead of how can we decarbonize at all? So this in Germany is not a debate. So I would say, well, you need a constitutional reform, more coalition governments, and I think this will help.
Thank you.
We have two questions before to go on with the debate. Andres, can you tell to our speakers the two questions that you have?
Yes, of course. So, first of all, I would like to thank you for your presentations, and we have two questions by the audience. The first one is by Rafael F. And he says, how can we cooperate with China on climate issues, assuming they are a climate change champion? Yet some would argue they subsidize many projects worldwide which are harming the environment if they are abusing human rights of the Uyghur minority and no go for any negotiation.
Second, you can do the both.
Okay.
Do the both, and then we can.
And the second one is by Stella Martin, and she says, my question goes to Professor Christian Reich. I would like to know your opinion about why Germany, the United Kingdom, and European Union member states in general are trying to give the Security Council a role in climate change. Thank you.
All right, let me start then. The China question. China is the big elephant, the elephant in the room, right? It's the largest greenhouse gas emitter, the largest CO2 emitter, and of course it will become the largest economy. But what we've seen under Xi Jinping, and this is an interesting shift, is that until 2010 or so, there was a strong focus on economic growth, right? Catching up with the industrialized nations, and the environmental concerns were really relegated to second or third priority. Right? It's really interesting, and here the change has been really marked. That if you look at how much money, say, the national policies have changed towards more environmentalism within China, there's much more money now invested in concrete, say, technological solutions to environmental degradation in China. So there's a big change domestically, and this has been then translated on the international level. I'm not saying China is perfect, right? It's an autocracy, it has huge problems with human rights, right? But I think you have to be pragmatic if you want to create a functioning global regime to fight climate change, right? So I know it's cynical, right? But you have to say, well, maybe we have to be realistic here and hope that we can, say, make use of Chinese investment in global public goods, right? Help us prevent climate change, or at least prevent some of the more harmful effects of climate change. But at the same time, we should still be critical of what happens within China. And of course, some Chinese foreign policies in the Belt and Road Initiative, if you look at some projects there, not all of them are green. Right? This is absolutely true. But then it's our job, the job of the media, the job of civil society, of watchdogs, right, to sort of point this out. And I would say, and this is an optimistic case, or an optimist's case, what the CCP, the Chinese Communist Party, what it has shown to us under Xi Jinping is that it is responsive to grievances, domestically at least. Right, so environmental degradation became such a big issue that the CCP had to change course. Of course, it's not perfect. It's not a democracy, right? So it would be much better if China would democratize, right? But China does, or the CCP doesn't want to democratize. So then I think we have to live within these constraints, and rather say, well, if we can push China towards becoming greener and towards more greener foreign policies, this will be better than not doing anything. Right? So we can still sort of hold out hope for change within China, more profound change, but right now we have to deal with the China that we have. Right?
Dorley, any comments on China?
No.
No? Professor Riek, finally, I heard kind of the same debate on the Council of Europe, talking about some members, I don't have to say the names, that don't really keep and protect the human rights, but they are full members of the organization, no? With the same theory, no? We prefer that they stay with us than stay outside, no? Inside we can control and we can ask and we can debate about few things, no? And it's the same with China. I agree with maybe your last final idea, no, about China, because for the media, China is the winner of the real champion about the Paris the summit, no? Because it's the only one who had been trying to say seriously that they are going to follow strictly the ideas or the agreement of Paris, no? The COP21. And the second question, Christian, is about security and the Security Council. Do you want to say something about?
Yeah, I'm not an expert on this because I see the UK and Germany as being quite different in their handling of the Security Council. And what will happen is the UK, since Brexit, will carve out a more autonomous niche in international relations, and it will have a profile that will be more similar to that of the United States, I would say, in the Security Council than to that of France as a permanent member. And Germany has the connections Germany has to France are much deeper and more intimate than the ones it has with the UK. So I think you will have to then compare the UK and France in the Security Council. And France has been, under Macron, but also before, has become more and more open towards German ideas. So it's sort of picking up German ideas and translating them into the Security Council in many areas. Say global health or, I don't know, internet governance, you name it. There's many areas, except of course in military issues, right? So when it becomes very sensitive to the national interest, France is still going to be France, right? A very Gaullist and realist power. But I think that this cooperation you have then to look at and see how that evolves and develops. And there's an argument against bringing climate change to the Security Council too often. And that is that of blockade, right? It's already a dysfunctional council. So if we sort of overburden it with climate issues, I think we'll see there will be the number of consensus decisions will go down even more. So this is the problem. So I think we have to protect the Security Council and really that it really just is mandated more narrowly and to deal with issues of war and peace. And all the other structural issues, and climate change is the most important one, right? They should warrant the attention of the Security Council, but if the Security Council doesn't work, we don't win anything, right? So then we should use the General Assembly or other means, right, within the UN family to sort of push for a more ambitious global climate change regime.
But I am a little bit scared about when I hear and I read on the media that normally, lately, many times climate change is under the same concept of security, how you said before. Because when I say that NATO has in his webpage, in the front page, they have important programs to fight, supposedly supporting the fight against the climate change. Or supporting the Agenda 2030 of the United Nations, and it's NATO under these ideas. I am a little bit scared because I don't really trust that they can do anything about. Of course, for the peace, probably yes, and peace is part of the fight against the consequences of the climate change. No? But I am a little bit scared. No, I don't know in Canada. In Canada, is a member of NATO, Dr. Cole, and Canada has an important role talking about security because the United States as beautiful and nice neighborhood. And what happened in Canada? What do you think? What do you read on the media? What do the people has on the debate, on the radio, on the TV about the climate change and security? There any kind of link and relation to or not?
Well, first of all the arguments that come out of Canada, we have to place it in the context where it is. It's sleeping right with an elephant. It's right next to the U.S. and everything that has to do with military and security, they go hand in hand. And in a sense, it's understandable because they are defending the northern continent. That said, that goes at one level, the official level. And then you have all sorts of talks, the not so official, and you have different groups that will stand out and speak about the issues that you are debating here. But when it comes to the, I don't want to use important, but when it comes to the serious debate between our Prime Minister here and the President of the United States, things do not move much forward differently in Canada from the interest of the United States, because they are looking at the security, in a sense, the security of the North American continent. If anything, I was talking about the Arctic because of the polar bear. The discrepancy mostly arises in the Arctic, the Arctic sovereignty, because the US really has a very small portion. As mentioned before, the Canadian Arctic is 1.5 million square kilometers, and the US has only Alaska. However, because of all the agreements that they have with Canada, and because up until very recently, Canada did not have the military power that would allow Canada to control and police the northern frontier, the Northwest Passage, for instance, that talks have it that pretty soon it's going to be opening to more commercial lines, and that will create an issue not only of security issue but also with the environment. Canada and the United States, they usually vote one in one. They are on the same page with very, very minor differences.
And then talking about the Arctic, the position, talking about the Arctic and the natural resources and etc., United States and Canada has the same thoughts, the same ideas?
Depends on the government in time, but looking back in history and the present and looking forward, yes, they are the defenders in the sense of democracy in the northern hemisphere, in the American northern hemisphere. And it will be, definitely with the president that is the former president in the White House, there were more issues. But when you look at the bigger picture, nothing gets done really that will change the cooperation agreement that they've been having for the last 150 years. They tend to go hand in hand, although perhaps you will hear on some talk shows or you will read in the media if a particular issues arise, but at the end of the day, they go hand in hand, they vote together, especially with Arctic security. And about the environment and the polar bears, there are all these species, that are threatened by climate change. But what I wanted to introduce in my small presentation is that there is also a cultural and a political issue in the plight of the polar bear, because all 90% of the people that live in their habitat are indigenous people. We used to know them as Eskimos. Now they're called Inuit, and the Dene, and a few other tribes, but very minor. The majority are that, and for them it's a lifestyle. They claim that to hunt the polar bear is a cultural right, and who is going to deny in these days the rights of an indigenous groups, because they have come into the arena for talks. My stand and the stand of many people is that they don't need the meat these days, because even if they live in a very remote village, they have access to supermarkets, and one can say they can buy all type of meat for their diet to move forward. But the counter argument is that it's a way of life, it's a cultural way of life, and they feel that it's their right to hunt the polar bear. Who are they selling the pelts to? I mean, we don't wear, the fashion industry is not centered on fairs anymore as it was until 50 years ago. Today the synthetic fairs are just as good or even better than the natural one. So why are these bears still disappearing to the great numbers that they are? If I can move you fast forward and go very fast to the southern cone, to the Antarctica, there aren't any polar bears there. We have other issues there as well with species of penguins, for instance, that are disappearing. Nobody pays much attention about the penguins, because the penguins are not the polar bears. The other species that are disappearing in the Canadian Arctic are the walruses, but the walruses' faces do not appear in all these magazines that I mentioned in my talk that we try to get, because they are not simpaticos, like the little cubs, But aside from that, then the point is that indeed it is a political issue. In the Arctic, it is a political issue, and the 40 plus different council of chiefs that deal with this issue, they are never going to come to terms, or they're never going to come in to see the problem from the same side, because they cannot come to an agreement with education policies, for instance. Imagine with something like the hunt of the polar bear. So is this something then that perhaps a larger body, a world forum should look into it, and perhaps the UN, and draft some measures, or what is your opinion? What should be done when we have different cultures within a culture? We have units of cultures that right now are coming into the forefront, rightly so, and they're demanding that this is their way of life. What if tomorrow in the Caribbean, a group of Caribbeans demand that cannibalism is their culture and is their way is their right to continue exercising cannibalism? I know that I'm exaggerating. I'm sorry, I'm using a silly metaphor, but I'm just trying to illustrate the point. Who is going to regulate these when these groups, rightly so, in a post-colonial world, they are coming into making decisions on their own? This is my question to Christian.
I don't know what the opinion of Christian and Anna, but my opinion is that it's like when we talk about human rights. For me, there are no cultural exceptions. Human rights is for everyone, and this is the same. We decided that we need to protect specific animals or a specific part of the land, of the earth, or whatever, the biodiversity, etc. We need to do that. If there are living indigenous people or non-indigenous people, is not the debate. I think the debate is because for me there are no cultural exceptions. But I don't know, Christian, Anna, maybe other colleague can say us something. What do you think about this cultural exception?
If I may, this reminds me of the debate that, it's been with us in international law for 60 years, the one between universal human rights and cultural rights, right, or group rights, and there's a tension there. There's always been a tension there. So I would say, again, from a pragmatic standpoint, I think you will have to look at then the concrete, say, effects or ramifications, right, of a cultural right. We can't be against cultural rights or group rights. I think this is too strong. So if we take the polar bears as a symbol of a larger, broader crisis, then I would say, well, the polar bears, they're dying out because of climate change, like because of a structural issue, not so much because of the agency of the Inuit. Right? So I think we have to respect that and see, well, the blame lies squarely with the international community. And then we have to think about, say, more creatively about how can we protect a way of life that is not technicist, rational, modern, right? That is different, and we should respect that too. But how can we protect it in, say, I don't know, by protecting habitats or by protecting, I don't know, by crafting legislation, right, towards this group. If it's just the polar bear, right, I think we can do both: protect the polar bears, but still respect a traditional way of life.
If I may jump up in here, Christian, the polar bear is they are dying because of the climate change urgency that we have. But why are they not, these indigenous communities, calling for a moratorium on the hunts of the polar bear, which has been offered to them from many groups for the last 8 years, and they refuse? So let's put the ball.
I understand.
Let's throw the ball a little bit on the other court, because if they were to stop the hunt, which, like I said, there is not a need for meat because they can go and buy it in the supermarket. There is not a need for fur coats anymore because we have fake furs. So why don't they stop it for 5 or 6 years, and then they can continue with their traditional way of life? Who has the authority to make them stop? Doesn't seem to be happening because they have 40 different councils of chiefs, from Taktayakak to Nunavut.
No, I understand there's a problem of voice, right? So what I find interesting when I hear your case study is that usually the argument is that fragmentation leads to less voice, leads to less political power, and usually this is seen as being, as geared towards the protection of the way of life. What you're saying is that the fragmentation leads to, say, a problem with the protection of polar bears. Right? So that's a different level there. So this is what I find stimulating. But even without the fragmentation, the problem is that the polar bears are probably going to die out, right? And it doesn't matter if the Inuit hunt polar bears for food or not. And I think this is the heart of the matter.
Well, I don't exactly agree. I think we should try and make sure that everything that we have at our fingertips, try to prevent that. The fragmentation of the political system, when you have 40 different bodies that can decide, they don't decide on anything, not to mention the corruption. The oil industry and the fossil fuel industry can corrupt chiefs or any individuals very easily, and that's another chronic problem as well. But you can, imagine the problems that we have just with one government, having 40 different governments. Everybody wants to be a chief and nobody wants to do the other job. And no, sometimes, I still feel that a moratorium on the hunting of the polar bear could help. We could see where it leads at. Maybe it will give us another 10 years, another 20.
What I'm trying to say here is that I think the Inuit are not the root cause of the extinction of the polar bear. So it means that we should think harder about how to protect this particular species. And then, it means maybe forcing the polar bears to migrate from the ice shelf, right, towards, say, a habitat on land or something like that, right? So can we create conditions somewhere where we can protect them there so that they can be then hunted by Inuit communities in a sustainable manner? So to me, this is a sustainability issue. I don't know if it works or not, but this is what we've been doing in Germany with the wolves, right? The wolves are coming back now, and it's a big story here. Wolves, of course, are dangerous, right? People are afraid of wolves, but the wolves are coming back and we're protecting them. But the idea is, of course, as soon as the population stabilizes, that we then sort of hunt it in a sustainable way so that we don't get a wolf problem, right? As with the wild boar, which is a huge problem here now. So what I'm trying to say is I think we have to find create a regime then on a national level in this case, right? To reconcile sustainability issues with conservation issues.
Yeah, you're right. But then if you put them on a reserve or you put them on a sanctuary, they're no wild anymore.
Right.
They're no wild anymore. Sorry.
Yeah, it's true. Yeah, it's true. We have 5 more minutes only, but because we have Dr. Calderley Cole with us, and she's from Canada, and she's in Canada, I have to ask you something too. Is that we believe in Europe that Canada is like the paradise for nature. We believe that everything is clean, that the birds jumping on the grass, happy and eating honey, and the Canadians are wonderful people who believe in the sustainability, etc. But as I heard you many times, the oil industry is a huge power in Canada and is not so clean. What happened with the oil industry, the climate change, and the contamination of the land in Canada?
Well, it is a structural industry for sure. It's not clean. However, again, you're putting me in the hot seat because it is the power engine of Canada, the oil industry, on the west and in the Beaufort Sea, in the North Shore. It has been for the last 25-30 years, not only for those provinces, not only for the province of Alberta or Saskatchewan, but for instance in the area where I am, which is the poor area of Canada, is the Atlantic Canada. There is a migration of migrants, of Canadians that go from here, from the age of 20 to the age of 60 to work and many of the communities, 80% of the small towns in this area, the small communities, are able to survive because the men and the women from this area go to work in the oil industry. So from these workers, they are supporting it, of course. And going back to Christian's argument, I think what here should be looked at, what you're proposing for the polar bears, this is what should be looked at to the extraction industry of the oil. But it's a mega, very important part of the Canadian economy. So it's not going to be solved very easily soon. Although I must say that there are talks going on. How serious these talks are, I don't know, with the U.S. and the administration that just left and the one that is coming on now. There are always sessions and people talking and commissions of this or that. But so far, it's still the Canadian power engine. It is the oil industry. So if it's not going to happen, if they're going to close it down, they will have to come up with something else. I mean, my students, when we present the type of argument to the students, and I would love to hear from some of the younger audience that we have, because they're very pragmatic. And they will say, well, we die because of climate change, or we die of starvation, but we're dying. So we cannot make them collide. It cannot be one or the other. We have to find a solution. I must say, because I know that our audience perhaps are not familiar with Canada, the Atlantic region is the oldest part of Canada. It's where Canada started, and from here it moved on out to the south and to the west. For instance, the province of Alberta, comparing to European standards, is very new. It only joined the Canada Family Confederation in 1904. And as Europeans, when we're talking about history, 1904 is yesterday, really. So it is a solid confederation. Canadians do feel Canadians from coast to coast. But when I go to visit my children, my kids in Alberta, I have to travel 5,800 kilometers to reach them from here. So, they do feel Canadian, but there are also very strong regionalism feelings as well.
Pues any final thoughts, dear colleagues, Christian, Anna, Dorley?
Yeah, if I may reply to this Canadian interjection, I think this is quite interesting. You have entrenched economic interests, and they translate into entrenched political interests, right? And this happens in a polarized political system. So the problem to me really is the first past the post system, right? Because it encourages political parties not to look for common ground between the parties, between the worldviews, but rather it encourages party to sort of define themselves against, right, the worldview of the other. And this leads to the foreign policy shifts and to domestic policy shifts that are quite marked in Canada, right, between the Conservatives and the Liberals. And you see always a big change to one direction, then a change back to the other direction. There's always a losing side and always a winning side. And so I'd say coalition governments are, they're unstable and they're experiments, of course, right? But what they really do over time, and I think this is what the German case can really show other countries, is that it can lead to consensus building and to a broader political center and to less polarization. So this is not just a lesson, say, for the United States. I think could also benefit from this, but also for Canada. I mean, the German automotive industry, everybody says it's hugely powerful, it's so important for the German economy, but they're greening too. They're greening too. They're heavily investing now in alternative motors and other things, you know. And even in the UK, the oil industry, or Norway or UK, you take the oil giants, and they're greening as well. So now they're changing. They're becoming less of an oil actor and more of a sustainable energy actor. So this is really interesting. So behavioral change can happen. The question is, can it happen quickly enough? And could it happen quicker, faster, if you wouldn't have, say, this back and forth on the political level?
Absolutely. Dorley, Anna, please. Anna, you want to say something? The last words, or for Dorley, or?
Bueno, yo encantada de haber presentado el vídeo. No se ha visto del todo bien, pero bueno, está el link en el chat. Y bueno, estos temas sí me quedan un poco más alejados porque no son los que normalmente investigo y suelo, pero todo es muy interesante y el tema del cambio climático naturalmente nos afecta a todos y a todos nos interesa, ¿no? Conocer todos estos detalles que a veces, pues la verdad, se escapan un poco, sobre todo los precedentes de Canadá, etcétera, que no conocía en absoluto. Muy interesante y gracias.
Dorley.
No, estoy de acuerdo. En una cosa estoy de acuerdo con Cristian. Es que tal vez un gobierno de coalición tiene que cooperar, ¿verdad? Sí o sí, para poder gobernar.
English, Dorley.
Pardon. Yeah, so I am in agreement with maybe just the one thing that I'm agreement with Dr. Rick is that perhaps a coalition government in Canada would work. He's right. In the past, there haven't been that many, but when we had coalition governments, they only lasted a year or two, and then they have to vote for re-elections. You are absolutely right. The system is not used to it. So they will have to learn how to cooperate and how to work with it.
Christian, a minute, do you want to say something or not?
No, I've talked too much. So I'm thankful for this opportunity, and it was a great debate. Thank you very much.
No, thank you to you. We have been talking from Germany, from Canada, from Malaga, Spain, from Strasbourg, and from Cantabria, Spain, and in the middle of this satellite event of the World Forum for Democracy. We are so proud at university to be part of the work of the World Forum for Democracy. I believe, and I have been attending the last years of the World Forum, and I know the huge work that they do every year, working and supporting democracy everywhere. And this year I absolutely agree with the idea that climate change has to be more than ever with democracy. And thinking about the video of Professor Cedeño, I want to keep in my eyes the idea that the classrooms, these empty classrooms at the end of the video, will be full of young people after maybe a dance party in the streets, but full of young people trying to debate about how we can change the world and how we can support events and forums like the World Forum for Democracy. Thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you.
We have a break of half an hour and we come back with the second round table, and we say bye-bye to our speakers. Thank you again, and we come back in half an hour. Bye-bye.
Ciao, ciao. Ciao. Many
Bye.
thanks.